I was 9 years old, and when I was 9 years old, I had a best friend. Her name was Christy, and she was white, which I didn't really comprehend at the time because kids don't see color. And we played together all the time at school. And then it came time for Christy to have a birthday party, and it was a sleepover. And we were really excited. She was turning 9. She was 8 at the time. She was turning 9. I was already 9. And I remember arriving with my little sleeping bag underneath my arm, and I'm going to Christy's house, and we've got all these things planned, and her mom had talked to my mom. And at the time I didn't know, and I don't think my mother knew, that her grandmother who lived with her grandparents lived with her. Her grandmother was an officer in the KKK, and her grandfather was a Grand Wizard, which is a really high-ranking officer in the KKK. And they lived with her at the time. So her grandfather had already left the house and refused to be there. And so when we arrived, I remember, and at this time, interestingly enough, I didn't really know I was black, if that makes any sense, because I was 9. I knew I was black. I didn't know it meant anything. You know, we had grown up in the American school systems. We observed Martin Luther King Day, and February was Black History Month, and we observed all those things. And I knew they taught us about slavery in the history books, but we thought it was something that happened centuries ago. I didn't really comprehend that me being black meant anything, or that her being white meant anything. So I arrived at her house, and my mom was there. And her grandmother was sitting over in the corner in a chair by the kitchen table. And I remember her mom coming to the door and like rushing to the door as soon as we arrived, doing this. And she had tears in her eyes, and Christy was crying. And I knew my friend, I knew something was wrong. And her mom said she can't stay, she can't stay. And my mom's like, what's happening, what's going on? And her grandmother in the corner, in a very bitter voice, you know, just very dark. And she said, that little nigger girl can't stay in my house, to my face while I was standing there. And at the time, I didn't know what the N-word was. It was the first time I ever heard the N-word. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know why she was saying it. I knew it wasn't positive because you could just tell the demeanor. I mean, it was so dark. It was like it was a dark corner that she was sitting over in, and she was even darker. And it may have been, you know, how my memory is recalling it. But it was dark and evil and mean. And Christy just went ballistic. She was like, I hate you, talking to her grandmother. I hate you. Why are you doing this? You make me sick. She had a tantrum like a 9-year-old would. You know, I hate you. Why are you doing this? She's my best friend. And she turned to her mom. She's like, why is she even here? Why would you should just make her leave, Mama. Why is she even here? And her grandmother just sat there with this. She looked at me like I was a piece of dirt. You know, like it was hateful. And I remember experiencing that like, whoa, what was that about? I was too little to really understand it, but I remember it like it was yesterday. And her mom explained to my mom, her mom was crying and shaking because, I mean, you can't control your old crazy grandparents, I guess. Maybe she felt like she was going to hold her hate in for the evening. Her grandfather had already left the house and refused to be there. But her mother told my mother she isn't safe. She needs to leave because she's not safe being here. And I thought to myself, I mean, who harms a 9-year-old kid? What do you mean I'm not safe? Like, what would they have done to me as a child? But I wasn't safe to be there, and I had to leave because literally my life wasn't safe being at a slumber party. So I remember being really upset, but it wasn't because the racism registered with me because I was a child. But on the continuum of sort of, if you study sort of black racial identity, and in terms of coming into the awareness or having an experience that brings you into awareness, that was certainly it. It was the first time I was called the N-word. It wasn't the last, but it was the first. First time that I realized that some people would see me being black as negative. I always knew that I was black. I just didn't know that it was a negative to some people. I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't aware that she was white and I was black, and that meant something. And it became an issue. It became a thing, you know. It got out what happened and people talked about it. And I think for me, it certainly affected our friendship. Subconsciously, I just think I knew that it was something about the extension of her, being her mother, her grandmother, they didn't like me. It was a hurtful experience. It was weird. I wasn't, and it was more so about I'm not at the slumber party. then her grandmother just called me the N-word and looked at me like she could kill me and told me I wasn't safe. None of that really landed on me at the time, but slowly it started to I became aware that it meant something. So I began to migrate more towards my friends. We were in an integrated school system at the time, which meant it was majority white, and it was only like 5 of us that were black in the classroom. And I started migrating subconsciously. I just don't think it was intentional. I just knew that my friendship could only go so far with her. And I think naturally I started migrating towards my friends or my black friends, and then the school teacher called up my parents and they said, we heard of the incident and Juanita doesn't seem to really be commingling with the other kids in the classroom, meaning the white kids in the classroom. And my parents were like, well, did you call their parents up and ask them why they aren't playing with her? Why are you asking us why she's not playing with them? Why is it the natural disposition that she has to assimilate to them and there's something wrong with her? She's been through the trauma, what about asking their parents why your kids aren't playing with Juanita? And it just became an issue after that. And certainly I became aware that I was black and that people would see that as a negative. And that I remember thinking, I did go through a cycle of thinking there's something wrong with me. Why would people look at this and not like me? Then it became a systemic issue throughout the school, and I remember one little boy, his name was Daniel, and all the little boys were calling the girls frogs, and he was like, you're a frog, you're a frog, you're a frog, you're a black frog. And then so again, and this was all in the same semester, and I'm like, why do I have to be a black frog? And why does this word black now take on this negative meaning? Why is it so much going? And again, this is the experience growing up in the South, and it just became a systemic problem in the school where you can't. I remember one girl, Katie, you can't play on the monkey bars because you don't shave your legs. You're a hairy gorilla. You're a black ape. You can't play with us. And these are things that they're being taught at home. When we all started that semester, we were all friends. We were just kids. And then this incident happens and people talk about it and kids become aware of superiority and racial superiority and all of these different ideologies that fuel their behavior. But we didn't start the semester out like that. We were all friends. So that's my experience. I mean, the Klan is very much real. It's very active. I don't hang out with them, so obviously I don't know the exact activity, but I have had my experience with them, and it's very real. It's not as politically correct, obviously, to be as out as one used to be, but yes, it's still very active, unfortunately, yes. I think it's more secretive. They're obviously I don't hang out with the Klan, so I'm not. But there are a lot of people that have done documentaries and exposés, especially in America, and honestly, especially in the wake of Obama winning, which one would assume that meant something in terms of race relations in America. It didn't really, and it kind of gave everyone, to me, and I talk about it with my family a lot. It gave everybody a green card to sort of let their real feelings out and be expressive about race, be it positive or negative, because they feel like, well, you've got a black president, now what? We've come a long way, so what? And it just sort of gave everyone a green light to show you how they really feel. And not necessarily to heal anything, but it sort of made it almost worse in a lot of different regards. But yes, the Klan is still active. They're very secretive. I mean, you're not going to know, but they're in every sector of function, from government to police officers, school teachers. You'll never know. Other people, obviously other members, will know, but you'll never know their active involvement unless you're talking about sort of like the skinhead sect, where they are very open and outward, but not very functional in society. But in terms of functional members of society, bankers, lawyers, doctors, they're there. You just won't know it because it's not advantageous for them economically from their career perspective to be that outward about it. And it's not just a southern state thing anymore. I think it originated there, obviously, because, you know, the the Mason-Dixon line, where you would go where slavery wasn't enforced, maybe in Ohio or Chicago, Illinois, New York, and those different areas, the Klan didn't migrate as quickly to those areas originally, centuries ago. But you know, it just in the 2000s, there are still lynchings that are happening in Mississippi. There are still black men being drugged on the back of trucks in Texas. It's not. This is a 2000 issue, 2003, 2004. This is current. It's current to me. I mean, it may be a decade ago, but if you look into the news, every once in a while you'll see, the obvious issues, and then you have to look at the fact that there are still systemic racial issues and race relation issues that are still happening in America, and one has to question why. Why is it that black men are being shot so prevalent by the police officers? What's their background? Who are they? Even if you go back to, I remember being in college in the O.J. Simpson trial, and the officer that was involved finding out his racial issues and hostility, it came as no shock to the black community, because that's been going on for years. It still is. It was shocking. Oh my God, he uses the N-word. Well, of course, like that's what happens sometimes. I think we become not necessarily numb to it, certainly not, but it's not shocking because it's not rare, unfortunately. I think a lot can be learned through the observation of kids and children. I have 2 children of my own, and especially being here in the UK, I mean, they have friends of all shapes, colors, and sizes, and backgrounds and nationalities. I think we could learn a lot if we observe children and see the purity in which they see people. My children's best friends, they aren't Portuguese, they're kids. They aren't British, they're kids, they're people, they're human beings. Somewhere along the line, it really is taught. Christy, when I was growing up, she didn't see me as a black little girl. She saw me as her best friend that made the best friendship bracelets in the class. So I was her best friend and we were friends. I think if we can see one another just as human beings, there really is only one race, and that's the human race. None of us are aliens. We all really are human, and we have more in common than we do differently. So I think it has to be something that is consciously and intentionally unlearned, because we weren't born that way. Children exemplify the way we were born, which is that we don't see color, we don't see differences, we just see people. So I would hope and like to think that maybe one day we can get back to that point, and not just be tolerant of one another, but be understanding of the commonality that we share in the human experience of just being human beings.